Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Advisor with Stacey Chillemi. And today I'm very excited because we have our very special guest. She is part of our community. She has a show on our channel, and it is author Rebecca Woulfe. She is an amazing individual, and she helps people with parents and their children, and teaching them how to communicate better, how to go about different things that happen in families in a more constructive and positive way. And today we're going to talk about the best ways to, exemplify self-care and self-love because parents need love too. And a lot of times it's very difficult to be a parent, and there's a lot going on in our lives. And a lot of times parents feel shameful or they feel that they don't deserve to give themselves self-love, but they do. And remember, guys, in order to take care of others, we need to take care of ourselves first. So I'm going to hand over the plate to my special guest and one of my special podcast speakers, Rebecca. And Rebecca, so tell everybody a little about yourself and tell us about your intake about what you feel self-love and self-care is and why it's so important to have it in your daily life.
Great. Well, Stacey, thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure. I always look forward to our conversations.
Yeah.
And today, as you said, I'd love to talk to parents about how to be kind to yourself. Most of my book, the gift of a punishment-free childhood, is about how do we support our children. What are some ways that we help them grow and learn and thrive as adults. But in order to do that, right, we have to have some resources. We
Yes.
all know any parent out there knows that, especially in those early days, we often don't get the opportunity to sleep as much as we need to or eat well. And at some point, we get to the point where we're so drained that we don't have anything to give back to our children.
Yes.
And when we take punishment out of the picture, because punishment is a quick solution, it asks us to be a little more creative, to invest a little bit more in teaching our children how to live on this planet. And so I thought it'd be great for us today to talk about what are some things parents can do to really take care of themselves.
Yeah.
What are some activities that rejuvenate and refresh parents so that they are available for their children. And then to also talk a little bit maybe about some of the triggers where children don't mean to upset us, but oftentimes they'll say something that really pushes our buttons.
Oh, definitely. And what are some of the ways that people, when parents can, some tactics and strategies and tools that they could do when they feel like they're coming to the end of their rope? Sometimes parents are, they just get so frustrated because so much is going on in their life, and then their children might do something and it might trigger them, and they just feel like they're at that boiling point, when water, you have the flame on and it's really high and the water is boiling, and any minute it's going to boil over if you don't lower that flame. What do you do when a parent feels like they're coming to the end of their rope?
Right. The most important thing is for parents to recognize that this happens to everyone.
Hmm.
I think sometimes we want to beat ourselves up like, oh, I'm a terrible parent. Why do the parents I see around me are so calm and which is not true, right? Everyone
Yeah,
gets to that point. So the
right.
first thing I always want to encourage in parents is don't beat yourself up, right? We all face challenges. We all get to that point where we're at the end of our rope. And so let that be okay, first of all, because if you're feeling bad about yourself, you're only adding fuel to that fire, right? Fuel
Yeah.
to that flame that you were just talking about. And so when you feel yourself reaching that point, it's important to probably the best thing to do is to remove yourself from the situation if you
Yeah.
can,
Hmm.
right? I say that we don't really want to put our children in timeout. We don't want to punish them, but sometimes it's good for us to take that time out, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, finding a way to make sure that your child is safe, if it's a small child that they're in a crib or in a safe place, or a young child, make sure maybe that they can stay with a sibling and just take a minute to either go outside and take some deep breaths, go into another room, right?
Right.
And so removing yourself. And then what I kind of naturally said was also that breathing, right? We know that when we're at the end of our rope, we do tend to tense up. We
Yes.
tend to breathe very shallow. And so taking that deep breath, right? Reminding ourselves that everything is going to be okay,
Hmm.
that this is part of being in a relationship with any human,
Yes.
our children, our partners, all of that. And really just finding that way to release some of that anger. But give yourself that, give yourself permission to do that, right? To just step away for a few minutes and get yourself recovered. Because if you don't, if for instance, let's say a child is having a tantrum, you come in all angry, right? All you're doing is escalating that tantrum
Yes.
energy versus if you
100%.
can just for a moment get yourself calm, bring that calm energy to a volatile situation, you actually help bring that energy down. I mean, you had an excellent analogy with the boiling water.
I feel like a lot of times when you take time out, you just walk away from the problem. The emotions are still there. The frustration is still there. Maybe the anger, maybe it triggered some anger, like the behavior, like, oh, I have to deal with this again. This has been going on frequently. When is this ever going to stop? Or I've seen it where it triggers, events where parents have related behaviors with their children with things that have happened to them in the past, and then they think about their parents, and then that's a whole different discussion, but it could trigger extra emotions because now they're seeing these situations that are similar to situations that may have occurred in their own relationship with their parents, and it's escalating the feelings because not only are they dealing with the current situation, but it's the trigger points from the past are now entering in along with that, and it's escalating, so now it's like, oh my God, I feel like I'm living my childhood over again with my child, that I don't want this, this is something I've tried to avoid. What are some ways that we can deal with this in a more constructive and more positive way? When you walk away, those emotions are still there. What can we do to help quickly resolve those emotions to get ourselves to a level of calmness?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And really what is happening. I always say our children can be our best teachers,
Hmm.
right? And that's because they do help us see what are the things that trigger us.
Yeah.
And in the literature, sometimes they're called triggers, sometimes they're called hot buttons, but all of us have them, right? Where we have typically a belief
Yeah.
that about ourselves that gets triggered by our kids. And one of the things that kind of demonstrates to people is that a child can act out or misbehave, and one parent will be like, "What's the big deal?"
Yeah.
Right, and another parent will just be like incensed, like how, right? And it's because that parent is triggered and the other one isn't, and
Right.
some other action might be the opposite. And so that's where you can see that, oh, this might be more about me than it is
Yeah.
about this child's behavior,
Right.
right? And so when you feel yourself feeling anger, feeling those strong emotions, you need to stop and say, is this something that's triggering me, right?
Yeah.
And as you know, this isn't easy work. This can be challenging because
Oh,
it
yeah.
makes you have to stop and reflect and think about and really take ownership of your feelings
Yes.
rather than saying, oh, because my child did this, that the child made me feel this way. When
Yeah.
in fact, the child didn't make you feel that way. You are making yourself feel that way because you have a belief.
Yes.
And so I did a little bit of research on this when I was writing my book. And some common triggers, right, are there are people who think that if they are questioned, right, they take offense, right? When someone might just be asking a question, but to be questioned means that to them, they have a belief that if somebody questions something I say, then they don't trust me,
Hmm.
right? So then that's what you would have to look at. There are people who feel undervalued if People don't always treat them with respect. And we know that kids are learning and they're not going to always treat you with respect because they're
Right.
still kind of learning how to do that. There's people who have control as their trigger, right? When they feel out of control or feel like they don't have control over a situation,
Yeah.
feeling invisible, feeling used, like you're taking advantage of me.
Yeah.
All of those kinds of triggers exist out there. And so for people to start, for parents in particular, to start really recognizing what it is they're feeling and why they're feeling that, can help them move through this and be that parent that isn't triggered by that
Right.
reaction.
I like that. I like that a lot. Now, you
Mm-hmm.
had mentioned to me earlier that there are different ways that we can use our energy and our creativity to kind of help our relationship and help the situations with our children by taking care of ourselves on an emotional, physical, and spiritual level. What are some of the ways that we can actually work on ourselves on those three levels to actually help ourselves and give ourselves the self-care and self-love that we need, and so we could have more constructive ways on, to be able to deal with our children when things start to pop up.
Mm-hmm. Great question, because you're right. We're going to more likely be triggered when we're not taking care of ourselves, right?
Mhm.
So, you mentioned the three kind of areas of our lives that are important. And so, we have the physical, emotional, and spiritual. We can start out, talking about physical. This kind of makes sense, and we've all heard these things, but trying to make sure that we do them. The first is getting sleep.
Yeah.
um because we know that can be challenging, especially when children are young, and there are children who sleep through the night at 1 month old, and there are children who don't sleep through the night till they're 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
It's just one of those continuums where it just takes some kids longer.
Yeah.
And so it's important for parents to get plenty not plenty, to get as much rest as they can. Plenty doesn't come for a while.
Yeah.
But the sage advice, nap when your children nap. So try to get some rest. If you have a partner, trade off nights so that you get at least 2 or 3 nights a week where you can
Yeah.
get a good night's sleep. Just making sure that maybe on the weekends, if you're a working parent, to try to get a little bit of extra sleep, extra rest.
Hmm.
But it is important to prioritize that as much as you can. And then eating, right? So the same thing happens with eating, right? Is we have, so much going on. If we have more than, if we have like 2 or 3 children, right? You might have an infant and a toddler, and right. And that's a lot. And then to also try to prepare healthy food can
Yeah.
be very challenging. It's
Hmm.
real easy to just go through the drive-through. I mean, even as kids get older, right?
Yeah.
And you're running to soccer practice or theater or all of that. And so it's important to make sure that you're eating healthy food as much as you can. Have healthy snacks
Yeah.
handy. That's great for you and for your kids. I tell a story. I was working at the time, and my kids were in school, and I'd pick them up, and I would be so crabby on the way home, right? On that drive, they were tired from their day.
Yeah.
And what I realized is I was really hungry, right? I had eaten lunch, but now it's like
Right.
5, haven't eaten anything for 5 hours. And so I started bringing a snack to work and eating just an apple, a granola bar, something at around 4 o'clock. And it
Yeah.
made a huge difference because then I was, my physical needs were better met, and I was not on that rope, short rope.
Right.
Um, so healthy eating is good, and then exercise. And again, I know, we're at a crunch time when we have young children, but even finding like 10 minutes a day to do some stretching, some
Yeah.
yoga, take a walk, whatever it is that is easy for you to fit into your schedule.
Hmm.
Try to create a routine, but again, give yourself grace if you miss a day,
Yeah.
right? Because we don't want to add that self criticism to
Hmm.
the formula.
Right.
So certainly getting exercise is the other way to really help that physical piece.
I like that a lot. That's great advice.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of, while I was raising my children, a lot of the parents, I would come across, I'm not going to say all, but I witnessed a lot of parents, they had gotten frustrated. They got angry very easily. They'd start yelling at their children. They'd start, getting really, and consistently all the time. And then, later on, I saw these children picking up those behaviors as they got older. And, I feel like it puts more fear into the child and that kind of separates the child where they're afraid to tell their parent everything because they know the reaction is going to be anger. But there's so many times where sometimes I think it's a learned behavior because when you look back, you see sometimes their parents did that, or maybe it's just, things in their own lives that trigger that inner anger, and now they have that inner anger and they just get triggered very quickly because of things that are going on in their life. But either or, I've seen children become introverts. I've noticed, there were some children I noticed they put like headphones on and they'd play video games and they'd lock themselves into their own little world, or they try to, just like one ear out the other, or go outside and, try to escape it as much as possible, but I don't think parents realize, a lot of these parents, the amount of stress that they're putting on their child and how this is going to affect their child later on in life. They say, oh, my child's an introvert. Well, maybe your child's an introvert because your child has locked themselves for so many years in their own little world because they don't want to hear the yelling and the screaming. So what are some ways that parents can learn how to control maybe their anger better? That, other ways, because it's not really your place to say you need to stop yelling, it's affecting your child, you can't go up to
Right.
the parent and say that. So, but it is. These behaviors affect your children, and then either they copy this behavior or they have problems due to the behavior that the environment they grew up in. So how do parents learn how to be more calmer and more not so frustrated, not so anger. And when their kids do something that, it's not good to raise your voice and start yelling at your child. What could parents do to be able to learn to take it down a notch and be able to communicate more constructively with their child?
Yeah. I think, what you're witnessing in these situations is it's that cycle, right? So the more they yell, the more the child misbehaves, which means the more that makes them want to yell even more, which makes the child want to either misbehave more or, like you said, withdraw. Like you said, you use the word escape, and that is so true, right? They just have reached the limit of how much yelling that they can take. And so, it really almost has to be a conscious decision to say,
Yeah.
I'm going to stop yelling. I think, reading about other ways to address misbehavior, obviously, I think the one that I recommend is a good option. There's lots of other ones out there, lots of books on how to support children without yelling. And so I think it really almost has to be that conscious decision and really recognizing, to your point, really how damaging it can be to that relationship.
Yeah.
I really believe that the reason that we say teenagers are so hard, those teenage years are so hard, is because we have created such a divisive relationship with them, and
Hmm.
they are finally big enough and intellectually advanced enough that they can start saying no, right? I'm not going to be treated this way,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to continue to punish me and ground me and take things away, I'm going to distance myself from you as much as I can,
Hmm.
because now they're getting to that point. If you have a relationship with your child that says, hey, I know you're here to learn. I know that when you make mistakes, we just need to figure out how to help you not make them again. And there's really no reason to punish you. You're just learning. And you take that punishment out of the equation. And now you have a relationship with your child that feels respectful on both sides,
Hmm.
and that where they want to have that connection with you. And then the teenage years aren't challenging because they're not trying to escape. They're not trying to get away from all of that yelling. And so, um, It's, and we always want to come back to, you will find yourself yelling regardless of what you, right? You're going to always get pushed back to the beginning of this conversation.
Yes.
Give yourself grace
Hmm.
and continue to focus on what are some other ways for me to address this situation, right?
Right.
And I always say, with kids, give them voice, give them choice,
Yeah.
right? It's human nature to want to have a voice in whatever's going on. And part of that is also giving them some choice, that's age appropriate.
Right. Exactly. Now, what are some tools that you had mentioned earlier, that different self-love and self-care tools that parents can do? What do you find most effective that really can play a role and help, parents really get to that level of calmness and clarity and be able to function so they can have a healthy relationship with their child and with their family members?
Yeah. Well, I think that, we talked about physical, but I think emotional care is even more important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to get to prioritize your relationship with your child and to want to be there for them, but in that relationship, it's not as fulfilling for you,
Yeah.
right? And so, even though for some it can be hard, right, because you want to give everything to them, you have to make time to get your own emotional needs met, because we all have those emotional needs.
Yes.
And so, one thing that's very important is to have friends. I mean, we know from research now that people live longer if they have friends in their lives,
Yes.
right? So, having that relationship and that connection with other people is really critical to our well being.
Yes.
And so, making time to be with friends without your children, right? So, to find some kind of childcare. I had a colleague who lived out of state. She didn't have any family in state.
Mm-hmm.
And what her and her husband found was that their pastor at her church was willing to take their son, one night every other week so that they could have a date night,
I
right?
like that.
And so sometimes you have to be creative, but you need time away from your child so that you can get your emotional needs met through friendship. And then, as my last example, if you are in an intimate relationship, making sure that you maintain that relationship, have those date nights, have time alone.
Yeah.
Even if you have a close neighbor, say, could you watch them while we just go for a walk? It doesn't
Right.
have to be a lot of time. It doesn't have to be a grandiose big date night, right?
Yeah.
Just some time alone with the two of you. And then, as I mentioned, keeping up with intimacy, right? Having
Hmm.
a healthy sexual life, right,
Right.
also contributes to our well-being.
Hmm.
And sometimes that can be very challenging.
Yeah.
And recognizing that part of our relationship also ebbs and flows, but
Yeah.
to remember that it really is an important way to connect with your partner, and
Right.
that it's good for you, right? It really
Yeah.
does help your well-being. And so those those emotional, um, getting your own needs met is very important. And the other thing I'd love to add here too is that sometimes parents want their children to
Hmm.
help them get their emotional needs met.
Yeah.
We've seen families where and maybe typically it's the same gender, but not always, where a mother and a daughter might have like this very close relationship and they almost make dad feel excluded, or a
Yeah.
dad and a son, or it can be really any combination of that.
Yeah.
And that is not healthy,
No.
right? It is not healthy to get your emotional needs met through your children. It's that idea that, well, let's have a baby. I'll have a baby because then that's somebody who will love me.
Right.
No, it's it's not the job of our children to have our emotional needs met. We need to do that with other adults.
Yes. And when you said that, it brings to mind, I've seen that in many families too. I've seen that with parents. And even like grandparents, they talk to their child, they talk to their grandkids, or they talk to their parent, or the mother or the father will talk to their child and tell them things that the child really shouldn't know. Even as a teenager, they shouldn't be put in the middle and centerized where they have to hear certain things. They shouldn't have to know if there is controversy between two parents, or if there is controversy where, maybe a parent is having problem with the in one of their in daughter-in-law, or a son-in-law. The children shouldn't be involved, no matter what age they are, and things shouldn't be talked about. There are certain things that you should, leave your children out of, because it's, even though they might be at a certain age, it's still not healthy, and they shouldn't feel like they have to choose between one or the other, or their mind shouldn't be altered where they think, oh, this one is wrong, this one is right, and then the emotions are changed towards that person. Even though the child and the parent aren't having a problem, well, they're hearing something from someone else, or they're hearing something from the mother or the father. Now they're have these emotions about the other person. It's just you really, there are things you just don't tell your children, is basically what I'm trying to get down to, and
Mhm.
I find that I see that a lot in relationships. I see that a lot in families where they tell a little too much to the child. And even though they might be young adults, it's still not appropriate, I think. And it's unhealthy for the child, or, for the parent to do that to the child.
Yeah, I agree. And we see that more often in divorced families,
Yeah.
right? Where they try to play off. Yeah. And it can be challenging, right? In that situation to you just don't want to ever say negative things about a person's parent at
Yeah.
any age,
At
right?
any age. Yes.
Yeah. You can have whatever is going on and you can talk to your friend about your ex, but that's not, to your point, exactly. It's you don't want to do it with your children, regardless of age.
Right, exactly. 100%. And I think parents need to really, like you said, have friends. It's very
Mhm.
important. Even if you look at grandparents or people who lost their spouse in their elderly years, their lifespan is shortened because of the loneliness. So that shows you, how much of an impact friends do make in your lives. And you should have a good friend to speak to. And if you don't, try to find one. Open yourself up to people until you connect with that right person, because it's really important to have that one person where you could talk to about anything. And if you can't find that person, then maybe you speak to somebody that could actually help you and get those emotions out. But it is very important to know your role, and to know how much you should, what you should and shouldn't tell your child, and what, and what the boundaries are, because there's always boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say that, what you remind me of is, in addition to just those friends, is that idea of community, right? So that you feel like you have a community, but that's also very important for children, right?
Yes.
I know some families that want to try to just be, it's just our little family, and right. And what's actually better for children is to have that community, that community at school with friends and other kids' parents where they feel comfortable. Or it may be a faith based situation where families feel like they have a community, or it could be a group of friends, right?
Right. Yes.
Whatever it is, making sure that you feel like you have that community for yourself, and then also for your children. I've
Yeah.
always said I want my children to have other adults in their life that are important to them,
Exactly.
not just me. Some of us want that control, and I
Hmm.
have to be the one that they come to all the time. No,
Yes.
I don't. They need
Exactly.
to have that whole community of other people that they feel safe going to,
Right.
which kind of gets to that spiritual part, right? We talked about physical, emotional, and spiritual. And this is going to be different for every single person, right? We all have our own needs. And, for some people, it might just be taking time to meditate and do
Yes.
yoga,
Mm-hmm.
right? For others, it is a faith-based environment. Maybe it is just taking time to do some deep breathing,
Yeah.
right? Or reading up on mindfulness, right? Where
Right.
we have that opportunity to just be present in the moment. And I
Yes.
think that aspect can also help us stay whole and
Mm-hmm.
be available to our student or to our children.
I like that idea. I think that's an excellent tip and piece of advice for people to really incorporate those things into their lives. It can make a huge difference. Now, if you wanted to take today's conversation and you really wanted to emphasize on some important takeaways, what are some things you really like to emphasize to the listeners today?
Right. So I would emphasize, first of all, to that it is, when you're engaging with your child, that they are not trying to make you angry. They really don't. They really can't. And so, um, finding really taking ownership of the situation and saying, how can I be the adult here, right?
Yes,
So recognizing that it's not about them, and that you need to stop and think about, what is my part in this? I think, as I almost always say, giving yourself grace, right? Know that you are going to get to the end of your rope. Know that there may be a time where you end up yelling,
yeah,
right? But giving yourself grace and saying, okay, I'll do better in the future. And yeah, I'm human, and it's
right.
okay that I messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, taking time to take care of yourself. The classic example is the airplane example, right?
Yeah,
Is they always say, put your own oxygen mask on first and
right,
then help someone who may need your assistance. And that's true when it comes to parenting. If you don't have the resources, if you don't have the oxygen, you're not as able to help them.
right.
So take care of yourself so that you can be that that parent that you want to be.
I love it.
Yeah, those would be my three takeaways.
I love it. Now, can you tell everybody the services that you have that you provide for others?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Stacey shared, I'm an author of the book The Gift of a Punishment-Free Childhood. The tagline is a new way to parent for a new world. I think that we can really make a difference in how we parent our children. That's available on Amazon or anywhere that books are sold. There's a ebook and paperback available. I also do coaching for parents. And so on my website, RebeccaWoulfe.com, and that'll be available on my podcast site. I have one-on-one coaching for parents. And then I also do workshops, where a group of parents may come together, a group that normally meets. I'll come in and help them with, facilitating a conversation about parenting. So I love doing that.
Yeah,
Get people engaged.
I love it. I love it. Now, where can people find you?
So I'm available on my website, RebeccaWoulfe.com, and that's RebeccaWoulfe.com. And I also have Instagram and Facebook, and all those links are on my website. And so would love to hear from folks.
I love it. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming on the show today. And this has been a great topic to talk about. I think it's so important that people understand that it's very important to implement self-care and self-love into your life, and that there are many ways that we can communicate and work with our children without having to take frustration, anger, do yelling and all these things that come from within our own issues, our own problems that we need to learn and find solutions for. And we need to find constructive ways to communicate with our children so our children can grow up in a healthy, happy, and productive home. So you make a lot of great points, and I'm so glad you came on the show today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You have a great day.
You too.